Bitcoin might be cheaper than it is than when you first bought it for someone who's pretty new to Bitcoin, but this is just a great buying opportunity. I bought in like 2 weeks before high and then just continued to dollar cost average all the way down to 15 and a half. I decided to like take literally everything that I had and put everything that I had into Bitcoin at 17 and a half.
Has Bitcoin changed? No. So Bitcoin isn't broken. The value of Bitcoin is the same. The price is just down.
If you're buying today at $100,000 or you bought like a month ago at 126, at the end of the day, when Bitcoin is $1 million, that purchase is going to be basically the same. The problem is that we look at Bitcoin through a fiat lens. We denominate it with a broken money, and that's why we get worried about it. And that's why the price goes up and down.
If you zoom out over the long run, the price goes up if you're measuring it in fiat currency. But we know for a fact that the value of saving fiat is going down.
Money represents time. And if you're storing your time in the dollar that intrinsically is supposed to be devalued, is really devaluing your time.
Welcome back to the show. Today we're joined with Joel Hodlman, and before we get into his journey and his perspective, it's worth talking about what's going on with Bitcoin today. So Joel, we discussed a bit off camera what's going on. In my opinion, it's a great buying opportunity, and for people just getting into Bitcoin to get in the game. What are you thinking on your side?
Yeah, on my side, like personally, and we kind of chatted really briefly about this before we started, but for me, I'm kind of price adverse. I don't look at the charts daily. I don't go like, oh, I'm happy or I'm sad because it's going up or it's going down. But for someone who, recently, like this year has gotten into Bitcoin, this has been a great year really to buy Bitcoin, that we're basically flat on the year. I know there's people, and I know some personal friends who've kind of got into Bitcoin over the last 4, 5, 6 months. And, they're probably buying in around 110,000, 115,000. And, now to be down 15%, you can see how that might be, scary or worrisome for them. But if your thesis is that Bitcoin's going up, I don't know why you're actually worrying about the price going down, because over the long term, the price is just going to go up. So it just means that you can get cheaper Bitcoin at these prices. So this is actually really a blessing for people, rather than something that I think they should be fearing. I know if we continue to slide down and we go down like closer to 90, if we go down to I've heard people say Bitcoin's going to go down to like into the 20s again. I'm like, I don't think that that's happening. But if for some reason that actually ended up happening, like that is an absolute godsend of a blessing for us, when the thesis is that Bitcoin is going higher than what it is and what it ever has been, right? Like 126,000 US, whatever that is in any other currency that we're dealing with. I'm actually from Canada. So, they'd be like 150 something thousand, 160,000 being the top price or whatever that is. I denominate mostly in US dollars because the Canadian dollar is just a snow peso anyways. It just melts away. But whatever your cost basis or whatever you're denominating it in, it's pennies on the dollar as to what and where it's going. So for anybody who's kind of looking at this and hearing, this session is, Bitcoin might be cheaper than it is than when you first bought it for someone who's pretty new to Bitcoin, but this is just a great buying opportunity. And I think as we talk about maybe a little bit about my story later on, that, I'll kind of get into how, because actually, I mean, I guess I'll get into it a little bit now, is that when I got into Bitcoin and like actually fully got into Bitcoin would have been in 2021, like basically at the cycle high. So I first bought in for that cycle of what I currently have at like 67,000. And then, we hit like maybe 2 weeks later, we hit 69K and went down from there. And, it would have been great for me to have bought in and then the number go up. But for me, I bought in like 2 weeks before high and then just continued to dollar cost average all the way down to 15 and a half. It was actually at 17 and a half that I decided, you know what, Bitcoin might slide down even farther from here, but another, 15 or 50% from 17K down to, 10 or 7K of what some people are kind of calling. I'm like, you know what? I'd rather put all my money in here at this point than miss it. And I'd be buying back in or buying higher prices of, 20s and into the 30s. So it was at that point that I decided to like take literally everything that I had and put everything that I had into Bitcoin at 17 and a half. And then thankfully, like, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks later, we hit market bottom at 15 and a half. And we've been going up from there. But those are the great opportunities that we have, because when you're getting in and you think that the price that you're getting is a fair value or you're happy. So for me, like when I first got in, I was happy to buy Bitcoin at $67,000. You might have bought Bitcoin a month ago, 4 months ago at $110,000. If the thesis then was that the number's going up, and Bitcoin's not just about number go up, but that is something that is relevant and big for people, like that hasn't changed. A couple months of, market manipulation or, some people deciding that they're going to sell or whatever, is driving the price down doesn't change the ultimate thesis. So it's just keep going back to your thesis. And I think coming to podcasts like this and listening to other people talk about like the actual fundamentals of what Bitcoin is and why Bitcoin is good, um, helps understand that even if we were to go down for another 6 months or another year, or maybe we have hit this cycle top and, we're still in cycles and there's going to be a bear market and all that sort of stuff, is that winter comes, it's November and the snow's about to fly out my window here pretty soon in the next month or so. But springtime comes and summer comes and, there's going to be nice beach days and we're going to have fun outside again and it's going to be good. So just take the winter. If we are moving towards winter in terms of Bitcoin price, I don't personally think that that's what's happening, but if it is and it's going to be some pain to come, don't see it as a pain, see it as some gain, because at the end of the day, the price is going to be higher than what it is, in the next 6 months over a long enough time horizon. And that's where it's easy for me to say that, like, I've been like really into Bitcoin for the last 4 years, been dollar cost averaging all the way down, all the way up. It's easy for me to say, I'm not worried because my cost basis is, I don't know, probably around $50,000, $60,000. And we're still, quite above that. But the longer you're in it, you're going to be in the same position. And, in another cycle, 2 cycles from now, like you're going to be laughing that people are scared because the price is going to be at 500,000 or it's going to be at 1 million. And people are going to be like, oh no, the sky's falling. And you're going to be like, yeah, my cost basis is like $100,000 or $150,000. And you're going to be, in good shape to be able to take on some dips. And you just see it as, it's cheaper for you to buy today than it was yesterday, and Bitcoin itself hasn't changed. So the value in terms of how people want to look at it maybe has, but it hasn't for what it actually is. So just take it as a blessing.
Yeah, that's a great last point you make. And before we move on, I want to double click on what you've just said there from your own experience when you basically bought at a cycle top, but then DCA'd the whole way down and then went all in before the bottom. I've had a lot of conversations with people recently who are following the 4-year cycles and they're not in Bitcoin yet. So they're holding off to make that purchase. Do you want to just talk a bit more about why someone might not want to wait and just start buying Bitcoin today?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was a strategy that was planned. I think it was a strategy or just something that happened organically and naturally. I don't think that I didn't understand cycles and I didn't understand stuff that way when I got in. I first got into Bitcoin actually in 2013. It was pitched to me as an idea of an inflation hedge. I was 18 at the time. I basically laughed at what is inflation? That's for the Argentine peso, not something that like we in a Western culture and society have to worry about. So that was September of 2013. 2 weeks later, Silk Road is taken down and basically confirms my idea of what Bitcoin was going to be used for, which was for criminal activity. My dad was like, no, like this isn't something you should get into, get out of it, get away, run type thing. But I had a friend who had bought like a significant amount of Bitcoin and was telling me and pitching the idea to me. I was actually in a room with him and he had moved his cost basis up to $88 a coin and he had just bought $50,000 worth of Bitcoin. So, throwing around some pretty heavy money. I mean, for someone even throwing around 10K, like that's not an insignificant amount of money, right? So I knew that he believed in it. So it's something that like I kind of watched from 2013 to 2020, and then 2020 happened. COVID, stimulus checks, vaccines coming, and it was the beginning of 2021 that I then was kind of sitting there, and we had just had our second child. I was 25, just about turned 26. And that's when inflation kind of became like a real thing. I was seeing obviously inflation that had happened over the last year, and I was projecting what inflation was going to be. And I remember sitting where I was working at the time. I was sitting at the lunch table with a few older ladies who come from Portugal, and they've seen inflation and they've talked about it. And I remember saying to them that like inflation, like my kid who just born like literally a week prior is going to be paying for everything that we're going through for the next like 70 years of his life. And if I add any more kids, like same thing's going to happen. I'm going to be paying for it. Like this isn't just something that I need to figure out for me. Like this is something I need to figure out for them. So going back to the question of like that somehow was my strategy. It wasn't my strategy to like buy at the top and then dollar cost average all the way down and then like hit a bottom to like time the market that way. I would say that timing the market is something that is not great. I think if you are trying to time the market, you're going to get burned. And I think where the blessing for me in my journey the first couple of years, and not that I think I was listening to some of the best people in terms of like who I was listening to on YouTube and Bitcoin, Twitter and all that sort of stuff. But that was something that I kept hearing from people like in the investment worlds and all that sort of stuff is that like time in the market is greater than timing the market. And so for anybody who doesn't know what the cycles are, it's kind of like you got like 3 years going up and then a year going down. And that's kind of like what um, the cycle is. And that's like what the bear market is. So it's like 3 green years and one red year, right? And obviously there's a recovery from bottom all the way up. And after like, I don't know, the cycle would be, partway through that fourth year, you go past where you were the cycle prior, and then there's the blow off top, and then you come down from there. And if we look at the traditional cycle, I think that puts us to about this time being the cycle top. And there's always like give or take a few months here and there on a cycle, but I kind of think that cycles are broken. I think we kind of saw the cycle be broken with the halving. We saw an all-time high or go above the all-time high of 69K just before the halving happened. There's just been a lot of things that haven't happened traditionally in the cycles, which is why I kind of think that even though we're kind of coming towards the end of a traditional cycle, I think there's a lot of other headwinds that are coming that's going to kind of push Bitcoin out of a 4-year cycle. But I do think that there's probably people that are looking at the 4-year cycle right now. And it's probably part of the reason why the price is going down is because they're looking at like we are approaching that time in the market and the price from here is going to go down. And if that is what people are doing and that doesn't happen and they're trying to time the market and this really isn't the cycle high for their thesis and what they're thinking, they're going to get burned because they're going to end up buying back in higher than what the prices are today. And that's what I'm saying about how this is a blessing for us to be able to acquire cheaper sats today than it was yesterday, because tomorrow, and by tomorrow, I don't mean literally tomorrow, but in 6 months, a year, 4 years from now, the price is going to be higher, right? And you don't know if we are still in these cycles, if we're not in these cycles. And, we might be at the cycle top and we might go down to like whatever it's supposed to be, 70, 60, $50,000, whatever that is. And for me, if I listened to what people were saying in 2022, when I decided to put everything into Bitcoin, if I listened to them saying that, Bitcoin was going down and still was supposed to go down to like 7K, I would have sat on my hands at 17 and a half. And like 4 weeks later, we would have been up like $20,000 and have never gone back to that price. So I think the best price that you can get on Bitcoin is whatever the price is today. You can't go back in the future and get even cheaper sats, and just be happy with the opportunity that you have today, and don't get greedy. Just take the price of today, because the price tomorrow is going to be greater.
Yeah, 100%. And I always like to say to people just to zoom out. And has Bitcoin changed, like you said? No. So Bitcoin isn't broken. The
Right.
value of Bitcoin is the same. The price is just down. And if people wait to buy Bitcoin lower and the price goes up, it's still only going to be a rounding error, but you're not going to have got Bitcoin when we know in the long run it's going to outperform like it has done. So, what would you rather? Would you rather just wait and maybe get an extra 10, 20% and buy low, but completely miss out, or have the chance of completely missing out if it doesn't go down? Or would you rather get it now? Maybe it goes down 10, 20% from here, but you bought, but then zoom out 3, 4, 5, 10 years and it all looks good. So, yeah.
Yeah, if you're buying today at $100,000, or you bought like a month ago at 126, at the end of the day, when Bitcoin is $1 million, that purchase is going to be basically the same, right? So it's not really something to worry about when you have that long-term mindset of where Bitcoin is going. And that's the thing. It's not like, Bitcoin is a stock and it's Apple and they came out and said, we're changing this and we're doing this, and guidance has changed, and we're laying off people, or we're now implementing this, or we're doing this and doing that, or tariffs are affecting the way that we're manufacturing, or a plant just burned in India and now we're moving everything back to China or the US, or like just different stuff like that. Like, that's what companies have to deal with, and that's why prices can go down. And obviously there's manipulation and stupid things that are happening in TradFi that way. But Bitcoin itself is no different than it is yesterday than today, other than, it's an extra day older. It's, there's less Bitcoin to be issued. And, just get the sats that you can today, and don't worry about where the price goes, because one Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin. And obviously, I think the problem is that we look at Bitcoin through a fiat lens. We denominate it with a broken money, and that's why we get worried about it. And that's why the price goes up and down, right? But at the end of the day, if you buy 100,000 sats, 100,000 sats is worth 100,000 sats.
Yeah, that's how I like to help people think now, as in sats as well, not in Bitcoins, because the way that the human mind works, they like seeing these big numbers rather than the small decimals. One thing I do want to touch on that you mentioned right at the start is you now don't worry about these price movements. But when you got started, these kind of price movements would affect you.
Oh,
So what was it, or what things would you recommend people that maybe are feeling a bit worried right now that helped you with the conviction and helped you realize what you held?
yeah. I think when I talk to people about getting into Bitcoin, part of getting into Bitcoin is that you actually need to purchase Bitcoin. The second thing is to actually figure out how to move it and, like what that actually is. And that maybe probably doesn't come right at the very beginning of it. But what helped my conviction was that because I got into it, just to back up a little bit, when I first was like, hey, I need to figure out what this Bitcoin thing is. It was also for me like I need to figure out what are stocks, what is money, what is everything like financial. But I knew that a big component of it was going to be Bitcoin. So that was like the middle of January, the early part of January of 2021. It wasn't till October that I actually decided to purchase Bitcoin, right? So it took me 9.5 months to get into Bitcoin. And that was through me studying and doing some stuff, but I didn't actually get it and deepen that conviction until I actually purchased it. And then when I purchased it, it's like, well, now I actually have skin in the game. Now I actually have to figure out what I held and what I hold. Because back in 2013, when I was getting into Bitcoin, I didn't understand what Bitcoin was. And it was just, buy it and then sell it. Right. I mean, like it sounded good. I bought Bitcoin at 124,000 or $124 and I sold it at $700, and then the price crashed down to like $100, a few weeks later or a month later or whatever. But if I was to do what I did then and not actually know what Bitcoin was, because to me it was just this thing that somebody had recommended, and obviously he had a very strong conviction in it, spending tens of thousands of dollars at a time on Bitcoin. And he's somebody that I had trust and thought was kind of smart, but it wasn't something that I understood. And it was just like, this is, there were other things going on that I was like, it's for criminals, and it's like believing all this FUD. But the difference in 2021 into 2022 for me was that I actually held this thing that I saw was solving an issue that I had. And I also, I guess, benefited from watching the Bitcoin price from 2013 to 2021 and saw that the price had gone up over, that 7 or 8 years. But the difference between then and 2021 to 2022 is that it was probably a daily for me that I was listening to different, podcasters, YouTubers, all that sort of stuff. I was finding books to read. I was reading articles. I was doing the work to figure out what Bitcoin actually was. And alongside of that, I was into stocks and buying, Apple, Tesla, all that sort of stuff, and kind of putting some energy into that. And it was kind of like putting the two of them side by side of like, what is better and I would say is actually needed. And like my Bitcoin journey and where I've got has nothing really to do with how smart I am or who I am. It's just been like the help of the community, whether that's on X, whether that's just listening to podcasts. And that's why like I'm super excited to hear that people like you are doing podcasts, because like I don't think we need less podcasters out there talking about the subject. Like I think we need more. And to hear something from a different perspective from a different person, if like we're just listening to the sailors out there, the Max Kaisers, take your pick of whoever you're like your biggest Bitcoiner or crypto, influencer is. Like none of them look like me. None of them sound like me. None of them have the same actual everyday problems as I do. But somebody like you, who's closer to my age, is my demographic. We're both, say, the same color or speak the same or whatever that is. Or maybe it's even just slightly different that, you're in Australia, you're from the UK, have a little bit different of a story. And it's like Bitcoin actually solves a different issue here. And here's how it's even stronger than I thought it was. So it's great to get the diversity of thought around the subject. So the longer that you're in, as I was saying about like timing the market, time in the market is greater than timing the market, is the same thing for our education. Is the more education that you have on the subject, whether that's like Bitcoin itself, whether that's like adding in like what is money, what is TradFi, like all of those things, for like Bitcoiners, like Bitcoin maxis like to just be like, just focus on Bitcoin. But I don't like, to me, it's not a horrible thing for you to look at gold or to look at what are other options of like financial instruments. And finances and different avenues of economics, because I think that helps the thesis on what Bitcoin actually is, right? So to sum it up, it's just feed your conviction with things that help that. And then for me, I think that that's reading some books, that's listening to podcasts like yours, or there's tons out there, and there's a whole bunch of great ones that I listen to daily or weekly or whatever. And you just find something that you like, and you might not like talking and listening to me, and that's fine. And there might be one person who likes this and gets something from our conversation today. Maybe there's 100. I don't know. There might be people who don't like you, and like I think that's fine. And they might like Stacy, or they might like whoever else that's out there doing a podcast. And it's kind of, what's your flavor? Do you like? Do you like strawberry ice cream, or do you like vanilla ice cream? Well, I don't even eat ice cream, so I'm reading a book. It's just take your pick on it, but don't just buy Bitcoin and then sit on your hands. It's, that's like, saying you want to be a doctor and buying all the stuff for doctor stuff, but then not going to school or taking any action on how to be a doctor. Like, if you want to be a Bitcoiner, yes, you can be blessed by just literally buying Bitcoin and holding it, but figure out what it is and how to use it. And I don't think that, like, again, I haven't been around for a long time. It's been 4 years of really being around Bitcoin for me, but like every day there's something that I find with Bitcoin, or every week there's something that I find with Bitcoin that, like, I didn't think of, or it's like, oh, like, I didn't know you could actually, like, it was probably about a year ago, watch this thing that you can use a ham radio to transact Bitcoin, that if literally all the power went out in the world. And that's like people's thing, like, oh, like, if they turn off all the power, like, how would you run Bitcoin? And like, somehow that's supposed to fear me into not having Bitcoin. It's like, well, actually, if you figured out how to do it and set it up all beforehand, you can use ham radios and you can actually transact in Bitcoin. Like those are just, to me, those are crazy and wild things to think about Bitcoin. There's always something more to learn. There was actually something yesterday that I really was pondering and thinking about, and it actually has to deal with you. Is that the email that I got to set up our podcast had a different date and a different time than what I thought it was. So I had like a little bit of a panic of going, shoot, did I like misschedule and do all this? Well, the problem is that the email came in as like 12:30 or something like that Australian Standard Time for November 5th. Well, it's November 4th for me, and it's now 9:30, right? So I was like it's just the different time zones. But then I got to start to thinking that it's actually kind of crazy that we live on the same world. And obviously I know, like, the sun and all that sort of stuff is how we base time, but like, whether you believe in the Big Bang and like evolution and that's how we got here, you believe in like a creation narrative and that's how we got here. Either way, like, the world, the earth was formed at the same time, but yet you're in a different time than I am. And this weekend we just had like our daylight saving time change. So like a week ago, this actually would have been 10:30 at night based on the sun and all that sort of stuff. And where I'm going with that with Bitcoin is, like, Satoshi, in creating Bitcoin, actually had to create his own time that couldn't be messed with. And that's the block height, right? He couldn't rely on, like, an English or an Eastern Standard Time or any time zone that man has created to be, because, like, if a government really wanted to mess Bitcoin up and it was strictly based on what the predictability of Eastern Standard Time was, a government could just say, hey, like, we're going to completely mess with this time, and then it's just going to completely mess with Bitcoin. So that was just like something over the last 24 hours that, like, kind of knew it, but like, it really hit me of, this is something and such a small, minute thing that Satoshi had to think about, but was a very important thing and aspect of Bitcoin, that, he wasn't just creating a money. He also had to create all these other things to go along with a perfectly sound form of money. And time is actually one of those things. And that, to me, is just like, I'm obviously still thinking about it and wrapping my head around it, but to me, it's just one of those things that like that's kind of blown my mind a little bit over the last 24 hours. And like, yeah, what does it really mean and all that sort of stuff. But like for somebody who is like daily into Bitcoin, thinking about Bitcoin, all that sort of stuff, like there's still, after 4 years and really after like, 10, 11 years, 12 years of thinking and looking at Bitcoin since 2013 is like there's still things I'm learning. There's still things that I haven't thought of. There's use cases I haven't thought about and how, Bitcoin helps these people, those people, helps me, helps all that. So it's just keep learning the more you can and feed that conviction. Don't just sit on your hands and let it come to you because, nobody's coming to help you. So help yourself and learn from what's out there. And I think that's the great thing with Bitcoin is that you don't have to go to a university and spend thousands of dollars to learn all of this stuff. It's like, I'm here, you're here. There's tons of other people on, Twitter or X, YouTube, Rumble, podcasts, books, all that sort of stuff. And you're going to have to kind of, use judgment and figure some stuff out. Like, am I saying something that's actually sound or am I blowing smoke up your ass or whatever? So, um, you know, be a little mindful of what people are saying. But in general, if there's enough people kind of saying the same thing in a general way, it's probably on base and stress test some of the stuff. Like use your own mind and kind of question some things. And we now have a tool that I didn't have when I first got started, which is AI. You can chat with an AI and say, I heard this thing about Bitcoin, tell me how this is true or how this is false, or like you don't even have to do all the work yourself that way, but stay curious, stay hungry to learn more about Bitcoin. And I think that'll help feed your conviction and will help if the price goes down. And it'll also help if the price goes up, because if the price goes up, and, in a month from now, we're looking at the price of $150,000. We're looking at the price of $200,000. Like that's something that everybody would love happening from where we are today. There's going to be a lot of people selling, right? And then they're going to sell hoping that they get back, or worse, they're going to sell thinking for some reason that the dollar that they acquire for it is somehow better than the Bitcoin that they had. So again, doesn't matter where you are in the cycle, doesn't matter where you are in your Bitcoin journey, there's more to learn because you need to deepen your conviction regardless of where you are, if the price is going down or the price is going up.
I love that. And it really is. There's unlimited rabbit holes to go down. And the cool thing for me is it's fun. The more that you go down these rabbit holes and find these different rabbit holes, the more interested you become, which builds on your conviction, but also changes your paradigm of so many different things, which is empowering in itself. And it, in my opinion, forces you to become a better person and see different things, and question perhaps what you were brought up believing. And like you said, it's so important for people to do their own research and keep researching and be a student forever. Because like you said, there's so many things that just pop up that you never even considered, and then there's another rabbit hole to go down.
And it might not even strictly be Bitcoin. I think money touches so many different things and it changes. I think when you change the money, and that's kind of goes to the mantra of Bitcoiners of like fix the money, fix the world is, and I think you're kind of getting to that you change the money or you go down, say, the Bitcoin rabbit hole, but then like 4 months later, you're down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, but while you're down there, you're also going down like a health rabbit hole. You're down a food rabbit hole. You're down like an education rabbit hole to like a political level or a religious level or like take your pick on topic. There's a rabbit hole there that Bitcoin touches. So
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing that I encourage people to do is just ask questions. Ask, where did this belief that I've got in my head come from? Did I create this belief, or is it being put there from family or from school or whatever? It doesn't matter what you're looking into or what rabbit hole you're going down, but be open-minded, ask questions. And like you said, some information is probably not correct. So you can make your mind up with that. but ask those questions. That's super, super important. So going back to your story a bit, I know you touched on how when you did finally take the plunge in 2021 and go properly into Bitcoin, it was because of inflation and a hedge against inflation. Can you go into what kind of feelings, thoughts, what you were seeing around inflation and Bitcoin as a solution that perhaps people might be feeling today that don't have Bitcoin as the solution yet?
Yeah, I think for me at that time, it's now early 2021. We're almost a year into COVID. Like my job is not looking like what my job was prior to COVID. Um, things are shut down, there's stimulus going out. There's, at this point in time, I don't believe there were vaccines put out yet. They were just being announced that they're going to be out. But it's like, it was just looking at, what has happened over the last year at that point, and then going, none of this is stopping. And there's going to be a huge cost with all of this. And does it even stop within a year? And I won't even say at this point I was too, tinfoil hattish. I was a little, at that point, and not to say that I'm like completely tinfoil hat at this point, but like, yes, I do question everything and see things in a different way than I think most people around me look at things. And, I'm a little bit more paranoid regarding government and what's going on in the world. But yeah, it was a fear. At that point, I'm 26 and I have a child who was just born. I guess she would have been 2 or 3 as well. And currently, I have 3 children. At that point, I'm looking at having 2 children. I don't own a home. A house is something that I would like to purchase. That hasn't changed. I'm here today with 3 kids. Still don't own a home. I actually have a 4th kid on the way, which is
Amazing.
something that, yeah, no, it is awesome, and I'm really pumped to add a 4th to our family. And that's something that like is very new. So like for me, the fear is still there, but I can put my hope in Bitcoin because I know that it's a sound money. But yeah, it's like any young person that's out there that is going, how am I going to make it in life? That's where I was 4 years ago. And not to say that I think that I completely am going to make it in life now, even though like I have, you know, I obviously want more Bitcoin, but I have enough Bitcoin that I'm happy with. But at the end of the day, I still don't have a home, so there's going to be a future selling probably of that Bitcoin, or trying to, leverage and loan against it or something. Like that's something that I have to figure out at the time that we want to buy a house. And I don't necessarily think that buying a house is the greatest financial decision either, but for me, I think it's something that like we want as a family, and there's more to buying a home and home ownership than just um, finances. But when the government can't take away my money, when I don't need permission to use my money, when I don't have to worry about, what I say, all those types of things. I don't have to worry about, taking a vaccine, or, towing the company line, or towing, what the government wants me to do because I have Bitcoin. There's a bit of freedom and power that comes with that. Somebody getting into Bitcoin today isn't going to be able to buy, the amount of Bitcoin that I have. They're not going to be able to buy, a whole coin or whatever. But the longer that you're in this and you just chip away, right? So for me, what I do is my paycheck comes in, and basically the difference of what I need for the month, like in terms of food, rent, all that sort of stuff, what is left over just gets put into Bitcoin, right? And I spread that out over a daily DCA. I don't really worry about what the price is that way, and just and just keep going. And, as you chip away at acquiring more sats, I think that fear of, what's going on in the world and not having the things that everybody thinks or wants to have in terms of like home ownership and all these assets and these big things of wealth is that, say you bought a whole Bitcoin today and that's worth $100,000. It is something that, people can do if they really, really wanted to do it, right? You know, to me, Bitcoin's base price is $1 million. So let's 10x from here, right? So the way I kind of actually look at Bitcoin is like whatever I have today, I just put another zero on it in terms of the market price. So if Bitcoin today is $100,000 and I can buy, you know, $21 today of Bitcoin, I just look at that and I go, well, that $21 is actually $210, right? And I buy another $21 tomorrow. Well, it's another really $210. If I work overtime or I sell something or I make some extra money, it's like, yeah, what's an extra $100? Well, no, that's $1,000, right? Over a long enough time horizon and perspective that way, it's like the dollars that you're earning today might not be enough for what you want, right? It might not even be enough for what you need today. But if you're able to keep what you're buying in Bitcoin over a long enough time horizon perspective, it's going to be, just add another zero onto that. So like in a month, if you make $2,000, well, that's actually $20,000 that you're making. You just have to hold on to it for a long enough time, and that $2,000 will be worth $20,000.
Such a good way to put it, man. And again, I like speaking in sats rather than Bitcoins to people that are just getting into the space because I find that it's easier for them to visualize if they're saving 2,000 Satoshis, 20,000 Satoshis, 200,000 Satoshis. Some point in time, there's going to be one Satoshi is 10 cents, then one Satoshi is $1. So if you can see these numbers, they're $2, $20 today. They're going to be so much more in the future. So if you can see that today, it's much easier to start putting money aside, start planning for the future, and ultimately getting hope, like you've said, because it is a struggle for our generation for everything. They've
Mhm.
kind of been rug pulled, born into a world of inflation, assets with the rich, the boomers already, and the price is just getting away from them. But anyone can buy Bitcoin at any price, any
And I think
percentage.
that's the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that it's something that anyone can get to. It's not like you have to, like, there are obviously public companies out there, but there are private companies out there that, you and I would never have the ability to get into. And up until recently, like, there are people that would have been priced out of, even Apple shares because it was too high for them, and exchanges and platforms and all that sort of stuff, institutions didn't allow you to buy fractional shares, right? It is a little bit different of an environment that way, that people can buy stuff that way. It's something that it doesn't matter if you're in Africa, it doesn't matter if you're in Canada, Australia, or the United States. Like take your pick on the world, you can buy Bitcoin, and it doesn't matter, how much money you have, how little money you have, you can have it, you can transact in it, you can use it, you can hold it, and it's yours. Again, to get to like even another deeper level is that you actually, if you're holding it the right way, is like you actually have it. You don't have to trust somebody else to have it. And that was, something, and this is like pre-Bitcoin for me, but I remember having a summer job and having money go into the bank, and then I wanted to take like 2 grand out of the bank, and I had to explain why I was taking all this money out of the bank. It's like, well, it's my money. Why does it matter? And I mean, like at that point, I was like 15 or 16 years old. And like, even to me at that age, it was just kind of like, don't I bring the money here and put it in the bank and like, you're just holding it safely for me? I mean, 10 years later, I realized, no, you weren't actually holding my money at all and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's where, when you learn about what the dollar is really the scary thing. And I remember this summer, I was talking with my brother-in-law, and we were talking about different financial stuff and just how he, is kind of leveraging some stuff to pay off loans and that sort of stuff. And I was like, like, that's just kind of why I do Bitcoin. And he goes, yeah, but like the price of Bitcoin goes up and down. He's like, I just like the dollar. Like a Canadian dollar is a Canadian dollar. There's no fluctuation. I'm like, yeah, but like how much could you buy with a dollar last year as compared to this year? And he goes, yeah, not the same. So it's like that there's an issue with the money, right? And I think part of it is that people don't actually see it, that it's the dollar itself. It's, some greedy corporate interest that jacks up the price. And it's like, well, no, they're doing that because like there's more money, there's supply and demand. And I mean, that was something you had posted with your last chat of like somebody saying something similar. And to me, it's just like they turn around and say that, 2% inflation is a good thing. And like money printing doesn't actually cause inflation. And that's just people selling something for a higher price. Like that's what inflation is. And it's like, no, if you put more money out into the system, like if you give me more money, if you came here and were like, hey Joel, like here's 10 grand. Most people are going to turn around and go buy something with those dollars. They're not just going to hold on to it, right? So now like I'm looking out the window here. I'm not at home. I'm somewhere else, but like I can see a whole like shopping plaza out this window here. Like people are going to go to Tim Hortons or to A&W or to Subway and go buy some food. They're going to go to Walmart and they're going to go buy a good. They're going to go buy a car. They're going to do all this. And that's the influx of money into the system, right? So now that there's money in the system, there's supply and demand on those goods that people are buying, right? So now if everybody can go buy, a car, right? Well, now there's not cars out there and that's just how markets work. Now the price of the car is going up because people are wanting more of the car, but people are wanting more cars because they have more to spend. And that's what we saw during 2020 and 2021 of all the stimulus checks that went out in all of the countries that were all in, whether it be Canada, Australia, the UK, or the United States, or whatever country that did stimulus checks. We all turn around and what did people do with their stim checks? They went out and they bought goods. They bought a PS4 or PS5, whatever the hot ticket item was. They bought new cars. Crypto people went out and bought crypto, and then they bought Lambos and they bought all this sort of stuff, right? It took money into the stock market because people didn't really know how to and what to do with their money because they're all stuck at home. So that's why you saw an influx of Apple go up and Tesla go up and all these things. And it's like it wasn't really to what those items are in terms of what they should cost. It's just based on the fact that you brought more money into the system. That just then naturally drives the prices up of everything. And like go back to like the boomer generation. Had traditionally only men worked and were the only ones allowed to work, right? And not that at all that I'm saying it's a bad thing that we allowed women into the workplace or anything like that, but I imagine it sounded pretty good to be like, hey, my wife could go work. She could go make, she could work half the amount of time that I make, and we can add 50% of our household income and increase it. I make $50,000. Now she's going to make $25,000. And now we go from a $50,000 family, which would have been great back in, 1950 or whatever time that was. And now we're making $75,000. Like that sounds awesome. And now we're here in 2025 and, most families both have to work and, someone has a second job or, both have a second job or a side hustle or something like that. And it's really because you just influxed the amount of money that was out there, right? And now you don't have the luxury of having a stay at home spouse, whether that be a husband or the wife. You can't afford to do that, right? You can't afford to have, a spouse just working part-time, right? It's like you're basically now forced to have both like mother, father, husband, wife working. And that's just simply based on the fact that, somebody at the whim of a button can hit a printer and print a bunch of money. And like, obviously there's a digital aspect to all of that too. And I'm not going to say that it's completely evil in what they're doing. I think that there's a lot of good intentions that are coming with this. And let's just go back to the last few years of COVID. I think there was good intentions from Jerome Powell, the Fed, the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England, whoever and whatever that is that they were trying to protect general people, or they were trying to protect at least somebody, right? But there has been no currency out there. There's been no fiat currency, a currency that isn't backed by anything or isn't sound, that hasn't failed. And essentially what we're doing is we're paying for the sins of yesterday, today, with inflation and taxation and all that sort of stuff. And again, I think they are trying to do something that is good, but unfortunately, we also deal with broken, fallen, sinful people, and broken people who have all the power, and power ultimately corrupts, is going to devalue what we have. And it's an implicit thing that they even say that they want to devalue our money by a 2% inflation target, which is never hit. It's always greater than 2%. They straight up tell you that the money that you earn today, so if you earn $1 today, that tomorrow in a year's time, that dollar should actually be worth 98 cents. Like, why are we continuing to say that this is an okay thing?
Yeah, it's funny that you had the conversation with a friend about that, because I had a family member, I had three in one day. You won't believe it, but they said, yeah, but saving in Bitcoin's risky because the price fluctuates, like your friend said. And I was like, I understand that, but if you zoom out over the long run, the price goes up if you're measuring it in fiat currency.
Hmm.
But we know for a fact that the value of saving fiat is going down. What does risk mean to you? Because for me, holding savings in dollars is the risk because it's guaranteed to go down. Of course, Bitcoin fluctuates, but it's going up and to the right. So when people can start seeing it from that point of view, but like you said, I don't think a lot of people actually understand that money printing's even a thing. The amount of conversations I've had with people, they didn't even know that was a thing. That money printing then devalues your dollars, your pounds. That's clear. I sent that screenshot this week. That's
Hmm.
not common knowledge because it's the opposite of what's taught in economics, right? So you can't blame them, but you need to protect yourself. And you've done a great job at explaining some pretty complex topics in simple terms. And to close out before we finish up, because I'm mindful of the time, if you could give one message to Gen Z, our kind of generation, 20 to 35, about money and looking after themselves, what would it be?
I think for me, I think there's two things. There's you need to figure out what is money. So I had a conversation with someone today about Bitcoin, and the reason why he doesn't like Bitcoin is because he's emotional about money. And I get it. And I don't think that it's unique just to Bitcoin. I think there's a lot of people who, if we were having this conversation 20 years ago, there's people that would be fearful of losing their dollars buying blue chip stocks, being Apple, Microsoft, Tesla, like those types of stocks. I think when you understand money, and I think where I have changed my understanding of what money is that money represents time. So I go to work and I exchange my time and my effort for dollars. So dollars don't actually mean money. They don't actually mean like the currency, the dollar, the bill, or the coin, or like the number in the bank account. What it actually represents is the agreements upon what I'm getting for the time that I put in and the ability that I put in at work, right? In other senses that people put it in, and Sailor will put it in, is that like Bitcoin money is energy, right? Or I look at it as time, and not that there's much of a difference or something. And the most scarce asset that we have is time. You don't know when we're going to pass. I mean, I could leave here in and I could get struck by a car and, this is it for me. We don't know when our time is up. So when we deal with money, and I think this is why money is such a big hot topic item and is something that we don't often talk about in social circles and all that sort of stuff. It's like, what are the three things that we're not supposed to talk about? We're not supposed to talk about sex. We're not supposed to talk about money. And we're not supposed to talk about religion and I guess politics. Like those are just the things that you're not supposed to talk about. Well, those are probably some of the biggest things that we should be talking about because they actually mean something at a much deeper level than everything else. And everything else probably runs off of, maybe not sex, but religion, money, and politics, right? And the reason why I think people don't want to get into Bitcoin and they look at the volatility and they look at that is because they realize what their time is that they had to put in to get the dollar. So sometimes it just seems safer to just hold the dollar that you've earned because that's just what everybody has and what that just is what it is. And it's just the normal thing. So, my encouragement to Gen Z, Gen X, like the people that are in our, age demographic is, really question what are you giving your time up for? And we live in this world of there is Bitcoin, but we still have to deal with the dollar, the pound, the yen, whatever we're dealing with. But do you really want to hold that thing? Because it's really a slap in the face to you to hold something that is devaluing your time, right? So if you value your time, if you value life, you should value what you're storing your time in. And if you're storing your time in money, the dollar, the fiat currency that intrinsically is supposed to be devalued is really devaluing your time. And I think all of us value our time, and many of us wish we didn't have to work so that we could spend our time in other areas. And I think that that's something that Bitcoin's going to afford a lot of us is to do some of the things that we actually want to do in life, retire early, or, eventually be able to afford that house. I think about, people who want to do art or want to start a business. It's like, you don't have to do, if your competitor sells 100 things a day, well, you only have to sell 10, because if you get the amount of money for 10 things, well, in 5 years, it'll be worth what 100 things would have been, right? You again just add that zero. So it's going to afford a lot of us in our age demographics and to be able to take risks and to actually build and do stuff that we want to do and not just work for the man. I mean, it's an encouragement for me for people that are in our age demographic is like go get married, go have kids and do all that stuff. But I also realize that our age demographic isn't really doing that. And in that, not that I'm trying to encourage not having kids and not getting married and all that sort of stuff. It also affords you to be able to, like, quote unquote, take the risk. But I think the less risky thing is to get into Bitcoin. But I think when you understand Bitcoin and if you kind of have that mentality of just adding the zero based on where we're at right now, you're going to be a little bit more comfortable of, doing something for yourself. And for, maybe even slightly younger generation than the 20 to 35 is like, the people that are just finishing high school or just in high school now, just about to think about what they're going to do is like, does Bitcoin actually maybe afford you not to have to go to university? Maybe you don't have to go get a 4-year degree and you can go figure something out on your own and build a business and take the risk and do it on a Bitcoin standard. And if you essentially, and this is kind of my thesis with a business on a Bitcoin standard, is that if you're starting out a business right now, you only have to do 1/10 of what, the competitor is doing, right? And if you're doing it on a Bitcoin standard and you're not over leveraging in any other way, and you're only taking on and doing what like the means of today are, which means that you don't have to sell Bitcoin and you don't have to do that. And not that it's a horrible issue if you have to end up selling something, because I do think that as much as Bitcoin's a store of value, it's also a medium of exchange. So that's a good thing too. But I think that Bitcoin is going to afford our generation to do things that if it weren't for Bitcoin, we wouldn't be able to do.
I think that's a great way to finish off the episode with that breakdown of seeing it as time, seeing money as time, and effectively you're being robbed of your time, sweat, equity that you're investing into the world. That's absolutely amazing, man. Joel, thanks so much for coming on. What I'll do is I'll put all of your socials in the description so people can head over. You've got an amazing account and share some awesome things. So for those that connected with you, they can follow you and follow along. I want to pass the mic over to you if there's anything that you'd like to close us out with.
Just keep stacking Bitcoin or Sats, because I do realize that most people aren't really stacking Bitcoin at these prices or these days. Is just keep chipping away. And, I think we all want more to come to us, but what is coming to us is what we're able to deal with and what we're able to manage today. And if, I were to look back and, have all the Bitcoin that, I could have or would have had in 2013, life would look a lot different, but I don't know if I would be a better person for it, because I don't think I would have been able to manage it, and I would have done a lot of stupid stuff and all of that. So I think, there's a part of life that there's a time and a place for things to come. And wealth is one of those things that wealth will come to you when you're ready for it. And if we're trying to push greater wealth faster than we're able to manage it, that's where things are going to go bad. And I think if you've been around the space long enough, I think you have seen that with some of the crypto influencers. You definitely can look at that in many of our lives, like in real life as well, of people that have, you know, seemed like they were doing really well, and then, they're kind of living on the street or living paycheck to paycheck, 4 or 2 years later or something like that, right? So it's just keep doing what you can, and that's okay. And at the end of the day, things are going to get better. And, with that, put your proof of work in terms of learning and all that sort of stuff. And, Rome wasn't built in a day. Your Bitcoin stack's not going to be built in a day. And let's all together win. And I think that's one of the great things about Bitcoin, is that I don't win by you losing. I win by all of us winning. So it's just keep chipping away, take what you can, figure out how to, you know, get more Bitcoin. It's okay if you have to sell a little bit, but, at the end of the day, more Bitcoin equals good. And just take it as it comes. Don't sweat too much. And yeah, for me personally, like if you want to reach out and chat, like I love talking about Bitcoin. I love talking about things. So, find somebody that you can talk with, and like maybe that's you, maybe that's somebody else. It's just find people that you can talk with. I would encourage people to, find people in real life to talk with as well, because I think that's important. Go out to a Bitcoin meetup, find people in real life. I've actually met with a few people through in real life, and that's been awesome. And I think, like, there might be a day that we actually get to meet in real life, and there's going to be a lot of other people, in the next few years that I am going to be able to meet. So it's, yeah, just keep building that community, find people out in real life, read some books, listen to some podcasts, and just, you know, go on with life, and don't stress about it too much. You don't need to roam today. It will come.
Awesome, Joel. Thanks so much for jumping on, guys. Make sure to follow Joel, and like he said, drop him a message if you want to connect. And thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.